5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening and bienvenidos to the second of 5 public forums we're having for the El Paso Community College District 2022 redistricting. This evening we're in the Northwest campus of EPCC at one of its newest buildings, beautiful building. My name is Raul Lerma and I'm the co-chair of the committee for the redistricting. I'd like at this time to introduce the members that are here this evening. I'll start at my right.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. My name is Daniel Bueno, and I'm looking forward to hopefully incentivizing engagement from the community.
My name is George Ibarra, and I'm honored to serve as one of the members of this redistricting committee. And I do have a couple of years of doing this, so I'm happy to answer any question that anybody would have.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this evening. The committee's worked really hard on developing some maps for public input as far as the redistricting goals. At this time, I guess my easiest part of my job really is to introduce our technical advisor that will be giving the presentation on the maps that the committee has worked very hard to come up with. Mr. Gunnar Sequist. Mr. Gunnar, you take it away.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Lerma. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second Public Input Committee meeting. And we are here, as Mr. Lerma said, my name is Gunnar Sequist. I'm a member of the Vicker staff firm, and it is our privilege to assist local governments and governmental entities throughout the state of Texas in their redistricting process. And we are particularly pleased to have been asked to assist the El Paso Community College District here in its process. The decennial census, or excuse me, the redistricting process is instigated or begins with the release of the decennial census data every 10 years. And once that data comes out, governments all over the state have to rebalance to the extent they have single member districts, such as the Community College District here does, has to rebalance the population across those districts based on the 2020 census data. In this case, I think most people know, but for those who don't, the El Paso Community College is governed by a board of trustees, and there are 7 trustees, each of whom is elected from a single member district. And ultimately, as we go through the redistricting process, we will be rebalancing the population in each of those districts. And at the end of the day, it'll be the board of trustees who have the opportunity to adopt a new map going forward based on the 2020 census. In this case, however, the board has stressed its interest in and the importance of input from the community and has asked that we get members of the community to come in and sit on this committee. And the committee is an advisory committee. They've been working very hard to try to come up with some ideas for maps to redistrict the community college district. And then those will be recommended to the board, and then the board will make its ultimate decisions. And so I would like to, although you got to meet some of the folks here tonight, I would certainly like to recognize some of the folks who couldn't be with us. Dr. Cynthia Renteria is our chair. Ms. Emma Acosta is a committee member. Mr. Paul Arciniega is a committee member. Mr. Brandon Burt, Mr. Joshua Carter Guerra, Mr. Julianita, Wesley Lawrence, Mr. Raul Lerma, we have Mr. Lerma here, Inocente Quintanilla, and then of course we have Mr. Ibarra here as well. And although everyone was not able to make it here tonight, all of these members have been very engaged in the process. We've had several meetings and each has made a very valuable contribution, so we certainly want to recognize each of them, even if they were not able to be here this evening. As I mentioned, we're here to redistrict the single member districts for electing trustees. And so what changes when we do that? Well, we changed some of the boundaries for the single member trustee districts. And what that controls is essentially, and here we have our chair. Good evening, Dr. Renteria. Good evening. So the single member district determines where a candidate can run for a position on the board of trustees from, the district from which they run. And then it also controls which voters are able to vote for a particular district, for a particular trustee, as voters can only vote for those candidates in the district where they live. And so when we are changing boundaries and moving boundary lines around in order to balance population, ultimately what we are affecting is what district do voters live in and where a candidate's district is. And just for reference, we have a list here of the current board members. As I mentioned, the Board of Trustees for the El Paso Community College is broken into 7 districts. In those districts, Mr. John Uxer is the currently elected incumbent trustee in District 1. Mr. Brian Haggerty, who is also the board chair, is the trustee for District 2. Mrs. Belen Robles is the trustee for District 3. Ms. Cristina Sanchez, who is also the El Paso Community College Board Secretary, is the trustee for District 4. Dr. Carmen Olivas Graham, who is the board vice chair, is in District 5. And then Ms. Nina Pina in District 6, and Ms. Bonnie Soria Nergera is in District 7. So those are our 7 current trustees for the El Paso Community College Board. And these are the current districts. So these are the districts as they have existed since they were last redrawn at the last decennial census. And so this is the current, what we refer to during the redistricting process as the benchmark districts. And this is what we are looking at and where we will analyze the 2020 census data to see where we need to make changes to these districts. Okay, just a little bit about redistricting. When we are talking about rebalancing population among the single-member districts, we are complying with the one person, one vote requirement, which comes from the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And what that requirement tells us is that for single-member districts, whether it's a city council member, whether it's a county commissioner, or whether it is a community college board of trustee member, the districts from which they are elected must have approximately equal population. The reason for that is if you have districts that are either significantly underpopulated or significantly overpopulated in comparison to their neighbors, that can have the effect of either undervaluing or overvaluing the votes of the voters in that district. And so we try to equalize that population or balance that population across the districts to try to make sure that everyone has an equal voice, one person, one vote. Because of the way that people are geographically distributed where they live, it is often not possible. In fact, it is almost always impossible to draw districts exactly equally. And so what the courts have told us is in order to have approximate equality of population, the rule of thumb is we want a total deviation that is less than 10%. So across the districts, we want a deviation that is less than 10%. How do we get that? Well, what we will do is we take the total population of the district and we divide it by the number of districts, trustee districts. That'll give us an ideal size. If you could distribute everybody equally, that ideal size is what that number is. We will then take the most populous district, the district with the most population in it, and the population with the least number of people in it, the district with the least population in it. And we will take the difference over and above that ideal size, and that gives us our total maximum deviation. We add those together to get the deviation, and when we redistrict, we try to make sure that that number is less than 10%. And here is a sort of a simple example calculation for a hypothetical 4-district board or entity. If we assume a total population of 40,000, that would mean that each district should have 10,000 in it. Here we have our most populous district is District A, which is at 11,000 people, or 1,000 people over the ideal, or 10% deviation. And then District D in our example is the least populous. It has 8,000 or 2,000 people below the ideal district, or a deviation of 20%. So our higher deviation on the upper end is 10%. And then the lower is -20. If we take the difference between 10 and -20, that gives us a total deviation of 30%, and that's obviously more than the 10%, so our hypothetical district here would have to redistrict in order to come into compliance with the one person, one vote requirement. And we are fortunate because we have computers that do all of that math for us as we go through this process. But that is how those numbers are calculated. This is the 2020 census data, what we call the initial assessment for the El Paso Community College trustee districts in their current configuration. As you can see here, we have 7 districts, a total population in the district of 865,657 people, at least as reported by the census. And the ideal size, if we were to divide that number by 7 districts, gives us 123,665 people, ideally, for each of the 7 trustee districts. If we look at our deviation here, what we see is District 3 and 7 are overpopulated by about 16.75%. And then our districts 4, 5, and 6 are each underpopulated, with District 4 being the most underpopulated. And so if we take District 3, the deviation from District 3, which is the most overpopulated, and the deviation from District 4, which is the most underpopulated, and add those together, that gives us an overall deviation currently, based on the 2020 census data, of 32.52%. And so again, what that tells us is the community college district does need to go through the redistricting process to bring those districts back into balance and to get that overall deviation back below that 10% number. And so more practically, when we're looking at our numbers, what this means for us and for the committee and ultimately for the board is we know that we have too much population currently in districts 3 and 7 and not enough population currently in districts 4, 5, and 6. Districts 1 and 2 are actually pretty close, but the others are either overpopulated or underpopulated. And so the redistricting task, as far as the El Paso Community College redistricting is concerned, is really moving population out of the current districts 3 and 7, and then filling that population in 4, 5, and 6 in order to balance across all of our 7 districts. We also have here a representation from the census. The census also gathers and gives us voting age population, which gives us a demographic breakdown for the districts as they currently exist. And what we see here is based on the 2020 census, the current demographic configuration of the 7 districts for the El Paso Community College districts. You have 7 districts that are majority Latino districts. And as we go through the plans, we've maintained that, the committee has maintained that throughout. So there's not going to be, as you go through these plans and look at them, there's not going to be much difference as far as the voting age population or the demographic breakdowns. It's really just a question of where we're allocating population from. As part of this process, the board has adopted redistricting criteria to guide the committee in its work and to ultimately guide the board in its decision in adopting a final redistricting plan. And these criteria are the criteria that the courts have told us under federal law are the appropriate criteria to consider in adopting a redistricting plan. And each of these kind of vary a little bit, so sometimes there are some trade-offs between them, but these are generally the factors that the committee is looking at as it's gone through its process and has been discussing as it tries to arrive at a balanced map to make a recommendation for the board. And the first is in making the dividing lines between the districts or in moving those lines, the committee is trying to use identifiable boundaries. Those are major roadways, geographic features such as creeks, arroyos, golf courses, things that are easily recognizable to members of the community so that they can tell and easily recognize where the boundaries to the districts are and also help them to facilitate easy voting by knowing where they are. The committee has also worked very hard to maintain communities of interest in neighborhoods. Communities of interest are areas where the residents share similar interests and who would be represented in a similar way. Also, neighborhoods that are together. For those neighborhoods who have traditionally been grouped in a district together, the committee has tried to keep those together and has also tried to, where possible, keep neighborhoods and communities of interest together. Of course, sometimes because of the fact that you're having to move population and the way those line up, you can't always be perfect at that, but this committee has worked very hard to try to recognize and acknowledge those communities of interest and neighborhoods. We use whole voting precincts when we're moving population. The reason for that is, again, to try to reduce confusion and have this redistricting process be cause as little disruption as possible. Using whole voting precincts makes sure that everyone in a particular election precinct is in a single district and therefore has the same ballot for their board of trustee vote. If you happen to split election precincts, you can have a situation where people in the same election precinct may be voting for different trustee districts, and that happens sometimes, but again, to the extent we can use whole voting precincts, eliminate any confusion around that issue, the committee has worked very hard to do that. The next criteria is that the committee has based its the plans that it is proposing on the existing districts. Once again, the idea is to try to create as little disruption as possible. It's not reinventing the wheel or redrawing the map. It's taking the maps, the current districts, and then adjusting them as necessary to rebalance that population while also complying with these other criteria. Again, trying to adopt districts of relatively equal size. That's our one person, one vote rule. Drawing districts that are compact and contiguous. I know the committee has worked very hard to try to, in addition to these other criteria, make sure that the districts they are drawing are compact, contiguous, and fit neatly in their map. Keeping existing incumbents in their districts. That's a criteria that the courts have told us is important because it preserves the incumbent constituency relationship between voters and their representatives. Oftentimes, voters have been represented by the same person for a very long time. They have a relationship. The elected candidates have worked very hard to establish that relationship and to learn their job and to know what they're doing. And so for the redistricting process, we respect that incumbency relationship. And then finally, the plans will comport or comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. In particular, this process is subject to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is a non-discrimination provision. And so as legal counsel, we're assisting the board and giving input just to make sure that any plan that's adopted doesn't have a discriminatory effect on any protected racial, ethnic, or language protected class. And so in terms of balancing the population and applying those criteria, the committee has brought two plans together that it is bringing to these public community input meetings in order to solicit input from the public. And I know that the committee is very interested in hearing as much input and feedback from the plans as it can get. So we have, I'll be able to show you the plans that the committee has, we have Plan A and Plan B, and I'll be able to show them up on the screen. We also have available on the wall here some large-scale maps that show street level and election precinct detail, which we'll invite folks down to have a look at a little later if they'd like to. We also have handouts with these materials that show the maps. And if we're looking at Plan A here, what we see is there are some red border lines, and those red border lines are showing you what the benchmark districts looked like originally, or what their current status is. The shading that you see on this map will show you where the proposed changes are that the committee has come up with for each of these plans. And so if we look at Plan A, what we see is that District 1 remains largely the same. It trades a little bit of territory with District 4 on the south side, just to kind of get a cleaner border along the southeast border there of that district. District 2 gives up a little bit of its territory to Districts 4 and 3 on the south side there. And then District 2 takes in a pretty significant portion of what was the old District 3 moving out to the northeast on that side there. District 3 moves closer to the center. It becomes a little bit more compact in the center. District 4 gives up some territory to 6. It also takes in a little bit of territory from 3, as I mentioned, and a little bit from 1. But the idea there is, although District 4 used to run much further down to the southeast, under both the committee plans that you'll see tonight, District 4 has become a little more compact and a little more centralized there. District 5 has shifted rather substantially. It has given up some of its territory to District 3, but it has also swapped some of that territory and taken what was District 3 out to the northeast there. And so District 5 has now taken that population and done that trade. District 6 has traded some population with 5, and then it has also taken in a pretty significant piece of population and territory from District 7 there on the southeast side. And again, as I mentioned, the overarching goal here was moving population out of 3 and 7 distributing it back across 4, 5, and 6. And so you can really see that graphically here, 6 taking a good piece of 7 to take some of that population and then moving it back across, 3 giving off population to 2, and then balancing out as well. So if we, oh, and here's also a map. Again, this is available as a handout also on the wall there, showing each of the precincts and where they are in the new plan. So what is the effect of Plan A, as we're calling it, when you get down to the overall deviation? Well, what we see is the deviation is well balanced across each of the 7 plans, and the overall deviation here goes from that 32% down to 1.76%. Obviously well within our 10% guideline, and so what we have here is a balanced plan. Our voting age population, again, demographic breakdown is going to be almost the same, very little if any change there. There was one additional discussion point that I know the committee would be interested in receiving some feedback on in particular, and that has to do with the particular border and some election precincts between the proposed District 5 and the proposed District 6. And in particular, there are a few precincts, election precincts there, that could really go either way. And the committee has kind of looked at it in a few different ways. But for anybody who is particularly familiar with election precincts 120, 121, or 122, either because you live there or have some other familiarity there, I know the committee would be interested in your thoughts on whether those particular precincts, one or all 3 of them, in your opinion, are a better fit with District 5 or District 6. So that's something that we are certainly interested in some additional feedback on. Okay. We also have our second plan, and the second plan is very similar in some respects, and then it has some changes that are interesting and worth pointing out. So here, once again, our District 1 trades a little bit of territory with 4 to get that clean boundary line there. 4, again, becomes more compact. 3 also comes more compact to the center. 2, once again, is going to go out to the northeast. So all of that is very similar. If we look at 5 in this plan, 5 actually takes on a lot more of what used to be District 6. And then District 6 does more of the taking in of the old District 3 on the northeast side, as well as the old District 7 on the southeast side. And so District 6 is probably the most pronounced changes in District 5, 6, and 7 here. And the primary difference, or one of the major differences between Plan B and Plan A, is you'll see that District 6 comes out further to the east and also a little further south. And then, so it's taking up more of that population out of 7 in that area, and then again, balancing it back across. Here we have the election precincts for anyone who wants to see where on this plan specific election precincts fall. And this is our census information. And so once again, Plan B does a very good job of balancing population. The deviation here is 3.81%. It's a little higher than Plan A, but still well within the legal tolerance. And so either one of those is an acceptable plan from a one-person, one-vote standard. In fact, both of them are very good plans from a one-person, one-vote standard and deviation numbers. Once again, we have our voting age population data that we've reported for anybody who wants to see that information and look at it. But again, across across both of the plans and consistent with the current benchmark, those numbers are largely the same or similar. Okay. This is the time when we're coming to our public input process. And in particular, we have 2 ways for the public to give us some input. First, we have microphones here present for anybody who is here and would like to make a comment. The other thing we have is for anybody who doesn't want to get up at the microphone, we have written comment forms. And you are certainly welcome to take a comment form, put your comments there, and then turn them into us. Those will be directed to the committee for consideration. And some of the items that you might like to give us information on is, what do you like or not like about the proposed plans? We welcome any other suggestions in terms of what boundaries might make sense, where communities of interest are being respected or where they have been overlooked. Election precincts, are there precincts that you feel like would be better moved? And of course, and I already said the communities of interest. So all of those are excellent points that we would love to hear from you, as well as any other thoughts that the public might have on these maps or other suggestions for the redistricting process for the El Paso Community College District. And I don't know that we have anyone who's actually here to do it, but normally I would invite folks to come down and spend a little time getting a close-up look at the maps on the wall. And we certainly would invite anybody who wants to do that down to do so. But if not, we'll move forward. But of course, the maps will be here, so if anybody comes in, they're welcome to do that. Okay, and then the last thing I just want to let folks know as we go through this process is what are our next steps? As Mr. Lerma mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, this is the second of 5 public input meetings for the committee. And so we'll have 2 more tomorrow, Saturday, and then 1 more on Monday. After that, the committee will take any public input that it gets and prepare a recommendation for the board, which it will tender by November 18th. In addition to this process, I want to make sure everyone knows there will be an additional opportunity for public input, as the board itself will hold a public hearing at its Administrative Service Center on November 29th. And so whether you participated in this process or not, you're welcome to come and address the board directly in that public hearing. I know the board would love as much public input as it can get as well. After that public hearing on the 29th, the board will consider not only the committee recommendation, but any other public input that we get, and then move forward with the final adoption of a plan either that evening on November 29th or at a subsequent meeting if it wants to take a little bit more time to look at that. So that's the general time frame for this process. And we certainly appreciate all of you who have come out here to give us public input, or those who will. And for whether you have or have not, we also encourage you to come to the board meeting on November 29th and address the board directly at that public hearing as well. So thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Gunnar, again for that fantastic presentation. Again, these events take a big team effort, so I would like to thank Sherry McCall, who's helped us with our technology at our meetings. Our legal advisor, Francisco Ortega, also helped as another team member. I certainly want to thank Dr. Carrie Moe and her EPCC staff who have been great setting up these presentations. The technical staff, again, as usual, outstanding job. Thank you so much for all your work. The sign language interpreter and Spanish interpreters, thank you all for helping with these presentations. So it's a big effort. Again, the committee's worked really hard on developing these maps. So again, thank you all. This session is being taped. So again, for more information on redistricting, you can go to that's go.epcc.edu/redistricting for more information. And again, thank you for attending this evening's presentation. We'll have one tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the Trans Mountain campus. So we look forward to anyone interested in attending then. Again, thank you and good evening. Chair, I don't know if you want to say anything?
No, I think that's
okay.
enough. Thank you.
Thank you again. Good evening.